Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. It is our 2024 ATP top 10 prediction video. I can't wait to get into this one. And I tell you what, it's been a very tough one to try and pick. And there's going to be some players that missed out that I'm sure you guys will have in your top 10. So make sure you do leave in the comment section below your top 10 for 2024 as well. Before we get into it, though, remember to that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating review if you're listening on a podcast platform. What I'm going to do first is actually go through very briefly for only a minute or so my predicted top 10 for the end of 2023 and the actual top 10 for the end of the year. So you can see here the three players in bold: Djokovic, Alcaraz, and Zverev. I actually got those ones right, so they'll pat on the back for me, I guess. But the rest was pretty much carnage, in honesty. So I had Medvedev, Rublev, Tsitsipas all in my top 10. So I didn't only had Sinner, Rune, and Hakac not in my top 10. Instead, I had Kyrgios, Felix Auger-Aliassime, who now looks like a crazy pick at number 3, and Nadal at 4, who didn't play the whole season. So I can forgive myself because he got injured, and that was unforeseen. So yeah, let's see if I can do any better in 2024. Let's get into it. So for 2024, you can see the actual top 10, and we just went through it for the end of the year at 2023. Djokovic was at 1, Alcaraz, Medvedev, Sinner, Rublev, Tsitsipas, Zverev, Rune, Hakac, and Fritz. So I'm going to start off with my players who just missed my cut for my predicted top 10 of 2024. There's a few. I've got a few here, in honesty, and it's because it was tough. I have to say, it was really, really tough, mainly because there's some players who I really like the look of, who have won some titles in 2023 as well, but it was a little bit tough to break the top 5 that I had anyway, and I'll talk about that in a second. But firstly, let's mention the honourable mentions even. So Nicholas Jarry was my first one. He won a couple of titles in 2023. I like the look of him as well. A lot of people who watch the channel will know I'm quite a big fan of his style. I think he's dangerous. If you watch, for example, the highlights of him versus Alcaraz at Wimbledon, I think apart from Djokovic in the final, he was the hardest matchup that Alcaraz had during that Wimbledon win. Also beat Tsitsipas as well at the back end of the year and has had some notable victories, but I put him just outside the top 10 mainly because I'm not quite sure whether he's going to stay consistent in 2024. He rocketed up the rankings in 2023 and was one of the most improved players of the year. So yeah, he's just outside. Another player who I put just outside, it's probably a little surprise to you, is Taylor Fritz. You might be thinking, what are you talking about, Fazan? He's in the top 10. Why you put him just outside? I just have a feeling. That Taylor Fritz has maybe not necessarily peaked, but I'm not sure whether he's going to be able to go beyond what he's done so far. He might make a deep run at a slam and make a semi-final, for example. I could see that happening. Could I see him making a final or winning a slam? No. Could I see him winning another Masters tournament? Potentially. But can I see him winning more than one Masters 1000 tournament in a year? No. Won a couple of tournaments again this year, including Atlanta. He is an extremely solid player, and he definitely squeezes his potential to the max. He really does. There's no doubt about it. But for me, he's just outside. Dimino was another one who's had, another pretty impressive year, coming up the rankings a little bit. And again, he's had some impressive results. And it's been a little bit of a shame to not include him in the top 10. But he's another player that's definitely squeezing every last ounce of potential out of himself. He really is. So kudos to him as well. Then I put Casper Ruud, and the reason why I put Casper Ruud just outside, I don't think he's going to make the top 10 again this year. And the reason why is he seems like a driven, hardworking individual, but he just does not seem to be able to get his head around grass. And grass is such a small part of the year. But even if you're able to gain some points during that season, it can make a difference because there's a lot of players who are very uncomfortable on grass, and it gives you a big advantage being able to at least gain some points there. And he just doesn't seem interested. He seems really disinterested on the grass, so that's fair enough. We know he's very dangerous on clay, and again made a Grand Slam final this year, made the Roland Garros final. But one thing I will say is that on hard court, I have not seen any improvements. In fact, I've seen a decline, or I saw a decline in 2023 from 2022. Now, 2022, he made the US Open final, the Miami final. He was playing some really good tennis on the hard courts. I think either he's plateaued and the rest of the field has gone beyond him, or a lot of the field anyway, and the top 10 players have gone beyond him on hard court, or he has dropped his level on hard court. And I think it's the latter. I think his level has dropped and he needs to rediscover it somewhere. So let's see. I mean, he made the ATP Tour final last year as well. Didn't even make the cut this year. I know he's had a little bit of well, he had his career best year of 2022. To replicate it is difficult. I just hope he hasn't peaked. Because it would be a shame for someone who's made 3 Grand Slam finals not to win a Grand Slam. But at the moment, if I'm being honest, it's looking less likely than at the end of last year. That's just how I see it. Francis TFO was another one. Again, has won a couple of titles, smaller titles this year, but just doesn't seem to be super consistent throughout the year and in the slams as well. Dimitrov, another player who I think will be close. If he plays how he played this year, some really, really impressive performances this year, going deep in a lot of tournaments, then I could see him potentially even nicking the 9th or 10th spot. But at the moment, I put him just outside. And then the 2 players I want to finally mention, Draper and Korda. And the reason why, Korda, at the start of the year, if you watched him, he beat Medvedev, he beat Hurkacz at the Australian Open, looked really good. But he's had issues with injury and form and consistency, and that's been the big issue for him. He has easy power, has a fantastic game. I think Djokovic said it. I think Korda had a match point or match points against Djokovic in Adelaide. Djokovic went on to win that match and win the tournament. But Djokovic said after, he's a really, really good player, and he should be competing at the big tournaments. He just doesn't seem to be able to stay fit. And the same could be said about Jack Draper, who, again, had some really impressive victories and has had impressive victories over some top players, but just really struggles to stay fit. So those two are dependent on fitness, and they could easily make the top 10. I think they've got the level to. I'm not saying they can make top 5, but I think they could creep into the top 10 at some point in the year if they are able to stay fit. So let's hope that they can. Okay, now let's get into our top 10. So I'm going to go from 10 to 1. Now, I've gone for Rafa Nadal at number 10. Now, this could be a bit of an optimistic pick, and everyone on the channel who watches the channel will know that I am a Nadal fan, and I don't talk about it a lot, and I don't talk about my love for him at all on the channel because I try to keep it as level-headed and as fair as possible. So, but I have to admit there may be a little level of bias coming into this because he's making his way back to the tour. But what I will say is it could be a miscalculation from Nadal, and you know, there's incredible athletes throughout time who have come back from injury as they've gotten older, and they've thought they had it in them, and actually they've realized the spark's gone as they play their first few competitive matches back. And I hope it doesn't happen, but it could happen to Rafa. But what I am banking on is that Nadal has waited and waited and waited, and he has waited and waited and waited because he played the Australian Open last year, hasn't played since, losing that second round match to Mackenzie McDonald, and he's kept on putting off the comeback, kept on putting it off, and now it's got to the stage where he has fully committed to coming back and playing. Now he's playing the Brisbane International start of the year, and then he's got the Australian Open coming up. I am banking on him knowing his body extremely well and banking on the fact that he's only going to come back if he's able to be competitive. And that's what he said throughout his whole career as well, that he doesn't want to play if he doesn't feel like he can compete at the highest level. So it can go one of two ways. That could be right, and if that is the case, and he wins some tournaments, and I'm not saying what he's going to win, but it could only be some 250s or 500s, for example, but get some and make some runs at slams, or he could completely flop, in all honesty. But I've gone for him at number 10 anyway. But that's one that, could easily go to anyone else, in all honesty. Now, 9, I went for Stefanos Tsitsipas. So that's a drop of 3 places since 2023. There's a few things around this. Now, after the final of the Australian Open, his level definitely did dip, and I'm not going to say that it's because he got into a relationship with Paula Badosa, because I think that's completely irrelevant. It's completely different to his tennis performance, and yes, it could have some effect, but she's also a tennis player, so I'd imagine it doesn't have an adverse effect in any kind of in any aspect, in all honesty. So I just think he himself clearly just has not been super concentrated. He obviously agreed with Philippoussis that they weren't going to be together anymore as part of a coaching setup. He's gone back to having his dad as the main coach. I don't know what the answer is for Steph, but there haven't really been any real improvements in his game, and that's been the biggest issue. In 2022, I was a little bit impressed, or 2023, I think it was. Sorry, 2022, where he played a lot of grass court tournaments, and I could see big improvements in his game, especially the return and the chip return on the backhand. The same can't be said this year, and I know he's had some injuries, including in the ATP Tour Finals where he had to pull out eventually, but I just wonder whether he's hit his ceiling, and surely that's not the case because he's not particularly old. I think he's 25, potentially 26, so he's not, he's not old, and he still has a lot of time to improve. But the question is he willing to make those improvements and really put in the hard graft? And I'm not sure, in honesty. He'll also be looking towards the Olympics as well, which is on clay, and he'll probably fancy doing something there, I would imagine. But I mean, it's hard to see him winning any major tournaments if he carries on like he has, in all honesty. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how he gets on, but I find it tough, in my opinion anyway, to pick him and say, you know what, I think he's going to go anywhere near above number 9 in the rankings. But I think he will be there because he's still a good enough player. I just don't think he's good enough to make waves this year. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope he proves me wrong because I really like his style and I think he's a very good player. In terms of what he did in 2023, he won Los Cabos, Grand Slam results, Australian Open finals, I mentioned, quarterfinals of Roland Garros, round of 16 at Wimbledon, and US Open round 2, which he lost to Jack Draper. So that was a good win for Draper. And round of 16, Wimbledon, Roland Garros quarterfinal was Alcaraz. Look, I mean, round of 16 was to Eubanks at Wimbledon, so that would have been a disappointing one. And final, of course, to Djokovic. So one lost Carlos and won an event, but he'll be disappointed, especially not to win a clay court tournament because normally he's up there and he's making big waves during the clay court swing. Rublev is who I've gone for at number 8. And again, that's a drop of 3 places. And maybe a little bit harsh because he had a very good season, in honesty. Won Monte Carlo, so he won his first ever Masters 1000 tournament. Also won the Nordea Open, which is a smaller tournament. Grand Slam results, quarterfinal at the Australian Open, Roland Garros third round, quarterfinals at Wimbledon, quarterfinals at the US Open. Now, a couple of those are losses to Djokovic, so that's just, fine. One was to Medvedev. Those are 2 players that he really struggles with stylistically, but I think me just saying that out loud probably proves, to me anyway, why he shouldn't be in the top 5 this coming year, and it's because he needs to try and figure out how to beat those players on a more consistent basis. And Djokovic has beaten once, I think, in his whole career, and Djokovic wasn't at his best by any stretch. Medvedev has beaten more times, but after beating him, he then seems to lose again twice to Medvedev, and it is a pretty lopsided rivalry. So, yes, he isn't the most diverse player in what he does, but he is trying to improve. I've been really impressed with his mentality, with his willingness to really dig deep as well in tournaments. And it's one thing that I've just been incredibly impressed with. And the results that he's shown this year have clearly been the result of some really hard work put in. And he plays a lot of tennis as well. I just have a feeling that there's going to be some players who we'll mention in a second who either are going to have better seasons generally, or I've, I've, I have a feeling there's a cluster of 5 players at the top who are going to be there or thereabouts in the majority of tournaments, majority of the major tournaments anyway. And I think that it's going to be hard to crack through that, especially given that Rublev doesn't have a great record against most of these players. So that's why I went for him at 8. I've actually gone for a bit of a brave pick, really, of Hubert Hurkacz at 7, and he finished at number 9 at the end of 2023. And the reason I've gone for Hurkacz is not necessarily based on Grand Slam results because they were okay, in honesty, but more because of some of the level I've seen from this year, and I'll mention it in a second. But in terms of tournaments, he won Shanghai, so a Masters 1000 tournament, beat Rublev in the final. That was a really impressive win. Also won Marseille as well. Made a few finals like Rublev did as well, but lost a few of those. So both players finalists in multiple events. Grand Slam results: Australian Open round 4, lost to Korda. Roland Garros round 3, lost to. Rublev lost to Sonego in his Roland Garros match. Hurkacz lost to Varelas. Wimbledon round of 16, lost that to Djokovic. There's no harm in that. And US Open round 2, lost to Draper. And in fact, Tsitsipas lost to Dominic Stricker in the US Open, not Draper. Hurkacz lost to Draper in round 2 of the US Open. What stuck out to me the most was his match against Djokovic in the round of 16 of Wimbledon. He was not far off. He also had a couple of matches against Alcaraz this year where he should have won them, in my opinion. And the style of tennis he plays can trouble anyone. And he was the leading stat. He was the leader of the most aces stat with 1,000 aces plus. The next best was Fritz at around 690, I think it was. So there's a massive gap. His serve is incredibly lethal. He needs to make the most of it on the faster surfaces. On clay, I don't see him doing big things, I'm going to be honest. I just think the serve and volley game is a little bit more... it's a lot more difficult to execute on a slower, higher bouncing surface, which is more conducive to defensive gameplay. But especially at Wimbledon, even at the Australian Open, I think he needs to be doing big things there, in honesty. And I see him making a really big run at Wimbledon this year. Now, it's dependent on a draw as well, because Djokovic, for example, is going to be the favourite if they were to play each other again. But there's not many other players. I could see him, for example, beating Alcaraz on grass or Sinner on grass, because I just think his game is that suited to the surface. So I've gone for Hurkacz at 7, and he continues to win big titles most years as well. The question is going to be, can he start making waves at the slams? And if he does, then he'll start moving even further up my predicted top 10 rankings. But for now, I've got him at 7. Zverev, I've gone for at number 6. And the reason I've gone for him at number 6, I think he will have a pretty good season. He was impressive this year, mainly because of the injury in 2022, of course, at Roland Garros to Nadal, where he twisted his ankle and ended up being ligament damage. Came back this year after time off since that Roland Garros match, so good 6 months out. And, had a pretty adverse start to the season, which was to be expected. Only round 2 of the Australian Open. But then he made the semi-finals of Roland Garros, which I thought was really, really impressive. Round 3 of Wimbledon, and the US Open was the quarterfinals. So, I think he had some good wins, including beating Yannick Sinner at the US Open, which was a big, big win for me. That was one where you look at him and say, look, is he going to be able to beat someone like Sinner after the injury? And the answer was yes. And Roland Garros was a little bit of a disappointment because he lost to Casper Ruud in straight sets, and that would have been ideal, in honesty. That would have been ideal for him to potentially come through that and make a final of a slam. I think he potentially would have also put up a better fight against Djokovic as well. So Zverev is who I've gone for, and look, he is only going to improve. You would imagine after last year, you would hope. The question for him, like Tsitsipas, is are they going to win a slam in their career? They're kind of teetering, and they're getting close at times. Although Zverev hasn't made as many finals in honesty as Tsitsipas, so that's one area where Tsitsipas definitely has the upper hand. But Zverev generally is more consistent throughout the year. But he needs to really make it count during the slams, in my opinion. He won Hamburg as well in the Chengdu Open, so a couple of tournament wins there. Now, the top five is where it gets interesting for me because, uh, to be honest, 6 to 10 was very hard to pick, but 1 to 5, in terms of the players, I don't think they were hard to pick. The order was a bit different. I think you could put these 5 players in any order, and I think you could easily make an argument for it. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but I actually think that that's the case. Because I just think the combination of players, in my opinion, are the top 5 players in the world, and I think there is a gap after these 5. So I've gone pretty interestingly for Medvedev at 5. That's 2 places that he would drop down if he was to be at 5. Now, I'm definitely not a Medvedev hater. I really like Medvedev and his style. I also think he is extremely reliable and proved again this year why he's so dangerous. After losing the Australian Open, there were big question marks around him, no doubt, and bounced back really nicely with some tournament wins. I mean, he won Miami, won Rome, which was crazy, on the clay, Clavedev. I mean, everyone knows that, and the fact that he made some leaps and bounds on clay is incredibly impressive. Won Rotterdam, Doha, and Dubai as well. Also made the US Open final, losing to Djokovic. But there's still something that says to me that the rest of the players I'm going to pick, when they come up against him in a slam, will they have the upper hand? I would think maybe more often than not in 2024. Now, I could be wrong because I thought Alcaraz was going to beat Medvedev at the US Open, and Medvedev proved me wrong completely. He is always going to be dangerous. I just wonder. I feel like Medvedev's on this type of trajectory, whereas 3 of the 4 players that we're going to mention in a second are on this trajectory, or they're going to be on this trajectory when it comes to 2024. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, big call from me. Grand Slam results for Medvedev in 2023. Round 3 of Australian Open, lost a quarter. Round 1 of Roland Garros, lost to Say Both Wild. Semi-finals of Wimbledon, lost to Alcaraz there. And then US Open final, lost to Djokovic. So, look, it was a pretty impressive year. 5 titles, 2 Masters 1000 tournaments wins. He always is consistent with getting some tournaments under his belt, and you have to commend him for that. I've gone for a pretty controversial pick at number 4, and I've gone for Holger Rune. And it's controversial, I think, because I've gone for Rune over Medvedev. I've got a few reasons why, and I could be completely wrong in honesty, because with Rune and some of the player that I've got number 3 as well, a lot of this is going to come down to their health and can they stay fit? Because not necessarily can they stay fit to play enough matches, but can they stay fit enough to play near full fitness? Because Rune, for example, played a chunk of the season definitely hampered with injury, and with an injury that was clearly bugging him or bothering him. In terms of tournament wins, only won Munich in 2023. New coach in Boris Becker, of course, after his split with Mouratoglou. Didn't really look himself in the first half of the season. Injuries and form just weren't helping. Heartbreaking Australian Open loss as well to Rublev, which clearly would have affected him mentally. Ended up losing a final set tiebreaker after being, I think it was 5-2 up in that final set. His level in the second half of the year was better, though, I think, generally. And I do think Boris Becker and a clean bill of health will propel him to the number 4 spot, which would be a rise of 4 spots up the rankings. And It's not crazy to say he'll be at number 4 because he was at number 4 at one point during this season. I do think he's going to go deep at some of the slams this year as well. And I think physical condition will be less of a worry given that he'll be 1 year older. And I think he will understand his body better as well. He also has one of Federer's ex coaches as well who's come in, which is interesting. He has a favorable head to head against Alcaraz and Sinner with a close one versus Novak as well. So, he has a lot of things going for him, in honesty. Grand Slam results: Australian Open round of 4 or round 4 even lost to Rublev. Roland Garros lost in the quarterfinals to Casper Ruud, and then Wimbledon quarterfinals lost to Alcaraz. US Open round 1 loss to Carles Baena. He was clearly injured during that one as well. I think he can improve on those results, in honesty. I'd be surprised if he doesn't make a semi-final of a Grand Slam this coming year. I would be very, very surprised. And I just think one of the biggest positives for me about Holger Rune is up here, his mentality. He has the type of fighting resilience that is very rare in a player his age. But two players that we're about to talk about in a second definitely do have it as well. So the number 3, I've gone for Yannick Sinner. And in honesty, he could have gone higher, and I could have let the end of this year go to my head and said 2023, well, he beat Djokovic 2 out of 3 times, won the Davis Cup, won a bunch of tournaments as well. It really good. Also broke his duck against Medvedev, beat him finally after losing multiple finals to him. But no, I've tried to keep a level head and say, okay, I think it's going to go up one spot. There is a lot to be happy about and a lot to look forward to, I think, if you're a Yannick Sinner fan. He won this year alone. He won the Canada Open, his first Masters 1000 tournament, so check. Also won the China Open, Vienna, Montpellier, and the Davis Cup. Multiple finals as well at the start of the year, which were losses to Medvedev, and of course won Vienna, beating Medvedev in the final there, which is impressive. Turned corners in the second half of the year by beating Medvedev and Djokovic, as I mentioned before, multiple times after not beating them at all in his career previously, breaking his duck against both players. In terms of Grand Slam results, well, round 4 lost to Stefanos Tsitsipas after coming from 2 sets to love down to take him into a 5th set, but lost the decider. Roland Garros lost in round 2 to Altmaier. That was a tough loss for him, lost in 5. And then Wimbledon semi-final was comprehensively dismantled by Djokovic, in fairness. And then US Open round of 16 lost to Alexander Zverev, lost in 5 sets, a topsy-turvy match. But the Australian Open, US Open, and Roland Garros, what you can say is that they were all 5-set losses. So at least he fought his way throughout the matches and didn't just fall over. And that's a positive. But what he will take from that is that he needs to be clinical, especially against an Altmaier, for example, at Roland Garros. He should not be losing in round 2. He should be going deeper Roland Garros. Interestingly, had the best result at Wimbledon on the grass, and he's clearly a threat there. And that's a positive, in honesty, because there's not many players, apart from the 2 players I'm about to mention, who are very good on grass. And then you can obviously add in maybe Hakac. Alcaraz, he's my number 2. So I've gone for the same number 1 and number 2. It was a tough one and the reason I say it was a tough one is because I was just thinking, can Djokovic replicate what he did in 2023? And he doesn't even need to necessarily replicate. He just needs to he wins 2 slams, and I think he'd be number 1 again. And the likelihood of him winning 2 slams in 2024 is pretty high, in honesty. It is. I would be, well, I mean, I'll have to give my Grand Slam predictions at some point in the video, so I'll wait for that. But I mean, he's going to be gunning for the slams again, as he has been doing recently, and he just seems almost unstoppable, in honesty, in a lot of instances. But we'll talk about him more in a second. Let's just focus on Alcaraz. So Alcaraz number 2, won Wimbledon, beating Djokovic in a 5-set thriller. Indian Wells, Madrid, the 2 Masters 1000 tournaments he won, then Barcelona, Buenos Aires, and Queens. So he was really, really impressive up until and the end of Wimbledon. He didn't win anything after Wimbledon. Now, yes, he made the Cincinnati final against Djokovic, and he was very close to winning that. That was, I think, a heartbreaking loss, and it would have taken a lot out of him physically and mentally. And it showed, I think, after as well. Grand Slam results, Australian Open didn't play, so I'm intrigued to see how he does in the 2024 Australian Open. Hopefully he stays fit, because it'll be intriguing to see how he does on a faster hardcore. How does he adapt? And he seemed to adapt pretty well at the World Tour Finals. Can he do the same at the Australian Open and go deep? We'll see. Roland Garros semi-finals, clearly struggled with cramp against Djokovic after 2 really good sets between the two at 1 set all. Who knows what would have transpired, but Djokovic just too strong, outlasted him physically, and ended up coming through the victor. Wimbledon, of course, as we mentioned, he won, and the US Open made the semi-finals, lost to Daniel Medvedev, who was extremely impressive in that matchup. And Alcaraz will now need to think yet again about how to play Medvedev after losing to him, because the adjustments that Medvedev made against Alcaraz, I thought, were absolute genius from him, and his tennis IQ is sky high. But Alcaraz, I think, will be at number 2 again. And look, it's definitely contingent on him staying fit for a lot of the season, similar to Sinner at 3. But if he can look after himself, which I'm hoping he will do, especially after talking about it a lot in the back end of this year, he was saying that he needs to manage his calendar better. And I think he's right. He said he was mentally and physically fatigued. And I'm not surprised. So hopefully he does that and he's able to peak for the slams. And no better player to mold your calendar or your preparation on than our number 1, which is Novak Djokovic. Now, you might say to me, Fazan, that's a bit of a boring pick at 1, but I just found it so difficult to pick against him, in all honesty. 3 slams, 1 in 2023, a final as well, so 1 match away potentially from the calendar slam. Won the year-end finals, won Cincinnati, won the Paris Masters, won Adelaide, and the only thing, and I'll talk about this in a second actually, the only thing I can see potentially throwing a spanner in the works is the Olympics, and we'll discuss that in a second. But look, I mean, he doesn't seem like he's slowing down. The rest of the field, what I will say is, are starting to slowly catch up. Obviously, Alcaraz beat Djokovic this year. So did Sinner. So did Rune. Those are big positives for a neutral, and also for tennis fans wanting the younger generation to come through, because it shows that the younger generation at least are able to beat him in some capacity. The big question is going to be, can these guys beat him at a slam? Because the only player to beat him at a slam out of Alcaraz, Sinner, and Rune and Medvedev is Alcaraz at the Wimbledon final. No one else has beaten him at a Grand Slam. Now, that is, to me, the biggest indicator. If they start beating him at slams, then we start saying, whoa, okay, right. Now it's getting interesting in terms of, okay, these guys are able to also play top level tennis against him in a best of 5 match as well. So we'll see. We'll see what happens in the coming year. Maybe they improve enough that actually that happens and Djokovic struggles to hold on to the number 1. But I would be surprised if he doesn't end the year again at number 1. The only thing, as I said, one of the biggest things for me is not even necessarily the rest of the field, but mainly it's the Olympics. The Olympics is after Wimbledon and it's on clay. Now, it's on clay, and at Roland Garros, he will, in my opinion, I think, I could be wrong because I don't know about Djokovic. I think he would happily not win a slam all year, but win the Olympics, than win 1 or 2 slams in the year. That is what I'm thinking. That's how badly I think Djokovic wants it. It's pretty much the only piece of silverware that I can think of off the top of my head that's missing from his collection. Nadal has won an Olympics singles title. Djokovic won 1 in doubles, I guess, so we can say that, but didn't win 1 in singles. Won a silver, I think. Djokovic hasn't won any medal because he hasn't won a bronze either, I don't think, because Del Potro beat him in the bronze match and then he lost to, I think it was Carreno Busta, I think, as well in 2020. So, yeah, I mean, 2021 it was, I think. So, look, I would be surprised if he doesn't put a lot of energy into preparation for that. Now, that brings up an interesting question because does he do the unthinkable and miss Wimbledon where he'd be a big favourite alongside Alcaraz? I don't think he would. I think that'd be a crazy move, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. It's very, very unlikely, but it could happen, in all honesty, if he's that set on it. So we'll see, because maybe we want to go clay, grass, and then clay. But a lot of players are going to be playing that smaller clay court swing. So there will be more emphasis on some of those tournaments, or they'll be more competitive anyway. So that's my predicted top 10 for 2024. And in fact, let me just include the just outside 2024 players as well, because I haven't put them here. But just outside, we had Nicholas Jarry, Taylor Fritz, Dimona, Casper Ruud, TFO. We had Dimitrov. And we also had Draper and Korda, who are two players that should be there if they say fit. They're thereabouts anyway. Then, if we go from 1 to 10, my predicted top 10 for 2024, Novak Djokovic, Carlos Alcaraz, Yannick Sinner, Holger Rune, Daniel Medvedev, Alexander Zverev, Hubert Hurkacz, Andrei Rublev, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Rafa Nadal. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to hit that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we cannot wait for the 2024 season. We will be doing a version, of course, for the WTA as well, to keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much, guys. See you later.